It was 1 week ago that CTV News broadcast our interview with Liberal leader Stephane Dion, who had some difficulty answering a question about the economy. Mr. Dion had accused Stephen Harper of doing nothing to put Canadians' minds at ease, and we wanted to address that important issue. So Steve Murphy began the interview by asking Mr. Dion what he would have done differently had he been Prime Minister during the crisis. Well, the fallout from that interview was immediate and overwhelming. And tonight, with the election behind us, the management of CTV News would like to set the record straight about the decisions that led to the broadcast of that interview.
Steve's wearing this. And, I make it a point of telling everybody that, Steve's our anchor man, but the actual decisions that day were not his. They were other people's decisions. I mean, he certainly works here, but they were not his decisions, ultimately not his decisions. And when people call and complain, and many of them have, I tell them that. And I tell them the tough situation and the tough position we're in as journalists to present the events as they happen or present a cleaned up version. I think there were actually 4 takes before the interview started. It was a very unusual situation that we would do that. Most of the interviews that we do are live to tape. And it just struck me odd that there was such a disconnect there with the question. Personally, did not think the question was that difficult, but there was something there that there was a major disconnect there. If you had to ask it 3 times. As we were leaving the hotel room, one of Mr. Dion's assistants, I was in the corner putting the tapes in my bag, grabbing my coat, and one of his assistants approached me and said, "You're not going to be using the outtakes, are you?" Clearly they were concerned about what had just happened in that room, as we were, and they left that room clearly thinking that those outtakes would not make it on the air.
There have been a number of misperceptions relating to this. Steve Murphy did not make a personal assurance to Stephane Dion that this interview would not be aired, and everything that happened in that room was on the record.
Central to the campaign was the argument and the issue that here's a guy who's running to be the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's being criticized for his inability to communicate effectively in English. And that was very evident in the interview that day. And because we had to ask the question so many times, we wondered, and the conversation and the discussion that we had was, is this part of a bigger story? Is this part of a bigger story about the economy, about communication, about a man who wants to be the Prime Minister of Canada?
My involvement started, I guess, shortly before 5 o'clock when Peter Millett called me from his cell phone from the back of a cab. And he said, "Great news, we have the interview with Mr. Dion, and we're on our way back to the station. But something very unusual happened, and you're going to want to have a look at it." So I put one of the tapes in, rewound it to the beginning of the interview, and began to watch. And I was very surprised. And I guess I asked myself, was this a poorly constructed question? Or did Mr. Dion not understand the question? Or was he just not able to answer the question? And honestly, we didn't know. And so we thought that the best thing to do would be to let our viewers decide that for themselves. It's very unusual for our national newsroom to be brought into a decision at the local level. This was a rare and extraordinary event.
We have a process here where if there is a very sensitive issue, we at CTV News across the country, at national and local stations, we all have a policy and a guideline manual. And if there is a very sensitive editorial issue that arises, we have a discussion about that. We bring in our senior editors. Jay Witherby, the news director in Halifax, called me and said, "We have a sensitive issue. Can we discuss it?" We discussed it. I had him send in the tape. I looked at the material of the Dion interview with a couple of my senior staff, and then we had a discussion with Jay, and together we decided that it was important that CTV News not hide anything during an election campaign.
CTV News stands by its decision, but it was a decision made by CTV News, not by Steve Murphy. And personal attacks against Steve Murphy are completely without merit. We can debate the ethics of the decision, but let's not aim our criticism personally at Steve, because it's without merit.